Hello, my brothers and sisters. This is Enemy Stand User, and we are back. And today, it's a bit of a retrospective on Jujutsu Kaisen as a whole. A look at how good Jujutsu Kaisen was, and also how it ended. There is a lot to be said about this series, and to be said as to Gege's potential for the story, and the manner in which that he left everything off. And unfortunately, there is a lot of negative, but there is still some good mixed with the bad, despite how things went. But let me just say, Jujutsu Kaisen is amazing. You know, when you talk about Jujutsu Kaisen, often the first thing many people think of is how good Gege is at making the fights, the jumpings, the action, the quirky one-liners, and especially the choreography. However, it should not be understated just how well Gege writes his characters, with their struggles, their moments, and their overall narrative. I'd say with how well Gege does his action, he also has a very good selling point when it comes to particular character moments and how well they make the reader feel in the heat of this Jujutsu world. At the very start of the series, the very first chapter named Ryomen Sukuna gave us a foreboding omen of a curse that would go on to influence almost every major arc in the series. Yuji is at the epicenter of this curse, and it's because of Yuji's drive to save others that he was the one to take on and become a vessel for the demon Sukuna. However, even in the first couple of arcs, the story ran deeper than just that. Disaster curses with sentience began to emerge, and they were spearheaded by the mastermind Kenjaku. So during the Fearsome Womb arc, during the Origin of Obedience, and during Goodwill, there essentially is a conflict between sorcerer and curse, and that conflict is really important to Yuji and his peers' growth. This conflict is most clearly seen in the Versus Mahito arc, because Mahito kills Junpei and he forces Yuji to see the madness and reality of dealing with a true curse. But the cast themselves all have something to add in this never-ending cycle of curses. And while there are many characters that appear to be one-dimensional, there also are a ton of unique characters like Todo, Maki, and Gojo, who I especially like. And what's really interesting about our quote-unquote good guys is how they appear in the balance of power. Jujutsu Kaisen has a lot of fly swatting, prominently with Gojo, and Gege really does it right. With the exception of Sukuna, no one can face Gojo, which forces the villains to tread carefully and create a plan to take care of Gojo and put him out of the picture to even the odds. However, even the disaster curses have somewhat of a sense of community, and they essentially are like a cursed family. So it's refreshing to see that even the curses recognize themselves as individuals with a common goal, because it gave these monsters a feeling that they themselves were like the true humans. So both the ambition of the curses and the reaction of the sorcerers in retaliation led to the Shibuya incident arc. In my opinion, the greatest arc in all of Jujutsu Kaisen. And the reason why Shibuya is such a great arc is because this incident was structured in a way that felt like an action and a reaction. This was a large-scale act of Jujutsu terrorism that changed the world. But really, it showed the organization and the strength of the Jujutsu society. However, this was one of the first times we see all of them lose. Shibuya was like a losing battle for both the disaster curses and for Jujutsu High. Kenjaku was the one who manipulated Shibuya in his favor, and everyone else was just collateral. Gojo was sealed, the disaster curses all died, and Kenjaku was able to culminate the Culling games and basically put all of Japan at his mercy. But on a grander scale, Shibuya set higher and higher stakes, and it forced our cast to grow because of Gojo's absence. And there are many themes in Shibuya, but a theme that stands out the most to me is that of loss as a sorcerer. The Jujutsu Society was not ready for Shibuya, and they simply lost. It was in that arc that Yuji was broken because the situation was out of his control, and he blames himself for his weakness. Nanami's death, Nobara's death, and Sukuna's rampage pushed Yuji further than he's ever been before, because it showed him despite how strong he thinks that he is, or what he thinks that he can do, he cannot save everyone. And these curses around him, like Mahito and Sukuna, kept breaking his resolve. They kept killing the people Yuji so desperately wanted to save, and eventually he just gave up. But brothers and sisters, we all know what happened. Aoi Todo reminded everyone of the most important aspect of being a sorcerer. It is to keep moving despite adversity. Why? Because we are the exception. We are Jujutsu sorcerers. So even when it's hard and others may give in, it is a sorcerer's prime ethos to never give up and not soil the names of those who have died. Giving up is the easy way out and could even be worse than death. So as the exception, Yuji regained his resolve and faced Mahito, determined to fulfill his role as a cog and keep killing curses. But what stands out the most to me is the path that is put in front of sorcerers in Jujutsu Kaisen. Because while it is noble to be a cog like Yuji says, there really is no right answer in life. Mahito and Sukuna may just as well be in the right as Yuji, because that is their quote-unquote truth. That is their instinct as a curse. That is all they know. So who are you to prove yourself like a Buddha and judge their souls? However you live, if that is how you truly are, see it through. And strange enough, we actually explored that a lot more in Yuji's final battle, as we'll see. But this arc was monumental for creating a reasoning like this. Shibuya was a clash of truths. The instincts of a curse versus the so-called dignity obtained by human reason. And from those two sides clashing and cursing each other, then one truth would come out on top. And I personally love how Gege writes this because it's not so black and white. There's always a bit of darkness in everything, but humans are complicated. Even well before Shibuya in the Hidden Inventory arc with Geto and Gojo's falling out, I would argue that that was some of Gege's best writing, because here are two young and gifted sorcerers who have very different values. The once noble Geto, who sees the preciousness of protecting the weak, and the haughty Gojo, who could care less about the weak. However, with Toji acting as a sort of catalyst and killing the Star Plasma Vessel and breaking the chains of fate, he forced both a physical and an emotional shock in Geto and in Gojo, who reacted in very different ways. Gojo had a physical reaction because he had now unlocked reverse curse technique and found the core of cursed energy. Gojo now became the honored one and ascended as the strongest sorcerer of the modern era. And see, now Gojo became disconnected from everyone, including Geto, because he is a stronger living creature. However, now that he had all of this power, he now had to decide what he would do. Geto, on the other hand, was left defeated, and when Riko died, he saw the disgust and the depravity of the weak. He saw all those people applauding the death of Riko, and something inside him snapped. He tried to deny it and even told Gojo that sorcerers cannot kill people like this. However, Geto's resentment was too great. Eventually, Geto chose his truth and killed many people he deemed as monkeys, so he hated non-sorcerers. This obviously created a rift between him and Gojo, because considering how powerful Gojo had now become, he still wants to hold on to this blue spring of youth. Gojo saw that he was left behind and he had to catch up. However, he never stopped loving his best friend. He had to reaffirm his values because now Gojo saw that he could only save those who are prepared to be saved. However, Geto made his own path. He said, "I hate monkeys, that's the truth I chose." He said that right at his death. So even at the end, he still wanted a world of only sorcerer, and that was his dream. But what about Gojo? What is his path? While Gojo wants to raise strong and intelligent allies so that no sorcerer will ever be left alone again. He wants to make a better future for Jujutsu. So ultimately, as a sorcerer, as a curse, or as a human, you have a truth that you could live by or die by. And it's the clash of truths that make Jujutsu Kaisen so fascinating. And I feel like in both Hidden Inventory and in the Shibuya arcs, this is where the series shines the most. In the following arcs after Shibuya, it really highlights the series' potential because at that point, the sky was the limit. The Yuji execution fights sparked a very heated rivalry against sorcerers essentially on the same side. The Perfect Preparation arc was a very good look into the Zenin clan and their corruption. Mostly after Shibuya, we see that not everyone in the Jujutsu society are on the same page or on the same team. And it's because of Gojo's loss and the instability of power in the world that our main cast like Maki were forced to grow. But I do feel like when our cast collected themselves and joined forces to take on the CULLING game, we did lose our way in a sense. Of course, with the introduction of the CULLING games, there are higher stakes, a ton of new characters, new enemies, new allies, and a higher ceiling of power. However, when we enter an arc as big as this one, there is less room for focusing on specific characters and their development, or for keeping a consistent theme for more than 5 chapters. However, with how Gege writes, he does not waste any time. More often than not, he doesn't have to spoon feed the audience what's going on, and he can create awesome character moments and interactions in only a chapter or 2 because he puts such raw emotion into it. I often think about how good Gege did Haguruma's character arc despite his short screen time in the series. However, that's not to say some major characters aren't disappointing, especially when their themes or their goals do not reach fruition. And no matter how I cut it, I always go back to Yuki and Kenjaku's conflict. Yuki was a sorcerer who wanted to target the source of the problems in the Jujutsu world. That's why she has a bit of flexibility in her morals, and not to mention she was a special grade sorcerer and a star plasma vessel who knew about the never-ending cycle of curses and wanted to stop it. There were 2 main paths to go down in terms of the future of humanity. It either lies in breaking away from cursed energy, or it lies in the complete optimization of cursed energy, which was Kenjaku's conclusion. Kenjaku's world would be created from the merger of humankind and Tengen, where Tengen would ascend and lose control, spinning the whole world into chaos and darkness, as curses and sorcerers would rule a new world in a evolved form of cursed energy beyond anything anyone can comprehend. Well, suffice to say, neither of those outcomes were realized, and both Yuki and Kenjaku's characters were killed off way before their characters reached some sort of significant goal. Yuki was the oldest and one of the most experienced special grade Jujutsu sorcerers who had a lot to contribute in JJK's conflict. Really, her character has a lot going on with her, considering her relationship with the higher ups, the society, and even with Lord Tengen. She essentially is like the voice of the star plasma vessels, and she does not really agree with how Tengen handles things. And Yuki is someone who is trying to solve actual problems with the cycle of cursed energy and curses. However, Yuki's life was cut short, and her sacrifice didn't really amount to anything when facing Kenjaku. In fact, it was just flat out disrespectful how conveniently Kenjaku countered her sacrifice, and after her death, her legacy is continued through her Book of the Soul, which actually was a key asset for Yuji to kill Sukuna. So technically, Yuki kinda did save the series, but just leaving her entire legacy as a helpful book, and not even mentioning how to actually stop the cycle of curses in the story kind of diminishes Yuki a bit and what she stood for. And I don't believe she was the type of character to just move on from. Her ideals could have seriously reshaped the future of Jujutsu. But what about Kenjaku, the 1,000-year-old mastermind who basically is the cause for every single conflict in the entire story? Well, I can say for certain, Gege absolutely wasted Kenjaku's potential and never gave the mystery surrounding Kenjaku any kind of real payoff. And you know, some fans cry and complain about not having a Sukuna backstory, but Kenjaku's story was begging to be told. Time and time again, Gege left crucial hints hints to Kenjaku's past with Jin and the Itadori family, as well as with Tengen, which never went anywhere. And to this day, I think that by far is one of Gege's biggest fumbles that he could have ever made, because it just flat out feels lazy and incomplete. Gege never delivered on Kenjaku, and the way he killed Kenjaku was flat out weird and goofy. I understand how negative this all sounds. However, Kenjaku has a very deep and intricate story that is only so intricate because Gege was the one to hint at his past, his goals, and his ambitions that literally shaped the whole course that this story went down. So Kenjaku getting killed in the way that he did was a massive waste. And even the will that Kenjaku left behind with Sukuna was never fulfilled. No, in fact, Sukuna actually changed in the end because he lost. So I'm sorry to say, but such a great villain and antagonist like Kenjaku had amazing potential. However, his end was an absolute mess. Regardless of that though, Gege actually revealed in a Jump Festa interview that he wished he would have set the Culling game in a bit of a different tone, like a tournament style arc. And that way he could even have given more time to characters and their backstory and their depth. And what's interesting is that he specifically mentions Angel and Sumiki's characters because those two specifically suffer in terms of their significance and their weight in the story. Both of them add a sort of complement to a different angle to Megami's story. Hana is like a romantic interest and wants to protect Megami, and Sumiki was Megami's motivation as a sorcerer, as his sister. So to see Sumiki's character tarnished as Yirozu and twisted didn't exactly give the reader a sense of deep care for Sumiki's character. Not to mention, Sumiki herself never had any sort of final words or anything to build up Megami in the end, which is very unfortunate. Really, like what was mentioned earlier, the Culling games was through the roof in terms of new characters and higher stakes. However, what really matters is the quality of the characters and the payoff that you get from knowing their story and their ambition. Some of my favorite moments in the story is when the series takes a step back and reveals a plot twist in the past or a deep burning secret shrouded in mystery, because it just ties everything together so nicely as to why and how the past is relevant to the future and also what's going to happen in the future. But nonetheless, a lot of plot points and characters never had the time to be fully realized or finished, which I'll be honest isn't the worst thing, but it is bad if they cannot satisfy the reader. Though in the last arc in the series, the Shinjuku Showdown saga was by far the craziest roller coaster of events, because this of course started with one of the most anticipated fights in all of Jujutsu Kaisen, Gojo vs Sukuna. This fight alone was the best and the greatest Jujutsu Kaisen battle throughout the entire story. And it's this fight that seriously was the highlight of this arc and actually shaped the rest of the story. The raw power both Gojo and Sukuna showcased was brilliant. We have not seen the level of power and complexity in a Jujutsu Kaisen fight last for so long and actually retain its hype. But probably the most interesting aspect of this fight was this Jujutsu Kaisen community itself. With the drama surrounding Gojo versus Sukuna in this modern era of shonen, it was truly like Agenda Kaisen. It was like Lobotomy Kaisen and all the craziness in between. With the influx of new and returning readers surrounding the hype of JJK and that whole scene, it was complete chaos like I have never seen before. And with so many eyes on this fight comes the criticism and the agenda, which honestly during this time in the series, it was something to behold. That was something you had to be there in the moment for. From chapter 225, first seeing that domain expansion battle and Gojo actually losing his edge, it was anarchy. Week to week, seeing fraud Kuna memes, the insults, and the complete descent into lobotomy was honestly insanely fun. But there was always a factor in this fight for the narrative and the plot that demanded that Gojo was the one that had to lose. The fight itself was very high strung, but under it all, Sukuna as an opponent was actually quote unquote not giving it his all, versus Gojo, who revealed himself that he was the one trying to reach Sukuna and admitted himself that Sukuna was stronger. So all in all, the fight does have a level of incompleteness that definitely did not satisfy everyone. Sukuna used a lesser form, yet he had the 10 shadows, which had the power to rival the Limitless. And with this stolen power, he was able to kill Gojo. There were a multitude of conditions that came with Gojo's death and defeat and Sukuna's final blow. And it's because of all of the unknowns that caused a lot of people to be unsatisfied with the conclusion of this battle. From one moment Gojo was about to win, however the next moment was broken in an instant without any transition, and then a justification that was explained 20 chapters later. And I'll admit, I have my own grievances with the manner of Gojo's defeat. However, Gojo's actual conclusion and his send-off was nigh on perfection. Chapter 236 is a notorious chapter because some may mark it as a time when Gege started to fall off and it went downhill from there. But even for this one chapter, I think Gege did an exceptional job at concluding Gojo's character. When it was Gojo's time, he invited defeat. He accepted Sukuna as the stronger opponent, and he was glad that someone stronger than him killed him rather than passing on from old age or something lame like that. Gojo's dilemma, and even somewhat of Sukuna's dilemma, is to understand the strongest. No one is able to reach them because their strength puts them on a higher plane, and in that comes a choice. What will you do with such power? Sukuna himself was absorbed in his power almost like a curse, but he actually had a choice to see beyond just himself and his desires. And on the other hand, Gojo ascended as the honored one in the modern era, yet he was left behind by his best friend. What all Gojo wants is a future where no one else is left alone. But in chapter 236, here in this airport, wherever here is, this is Gojo's true self. This is his blue spring of youth with Nanami, Haibara, Yaga, Riko, and Geto. No more suffering, no longer being the strongest. Here Gojo is happy, perhaps the happiest that he's ever been, and all he can do is pray that this is not a dream. Well, brothers and sisters, I wish I could say that it gets better from here. And while the Shinjuku Showdown saga has a lot of good highs, it also has its lows, and it can get real low. From this point, the Agenda Kaisen stream has peaked. I have my own frustrations about the week-to-week reading experience, but this arc lasted well over a year, and in a sense, it was infamously given a common theme, which was the Sukuna cycle. This arc was a non-stop mission to take down Sukuna, and I have to say, Gege has never structured a battle this way to where it goes on for so long and goes through a gauntlet of over 20 plus characters with multiple plans, multiple deaths, and Sukuna glaze on the likes that we have never seen before. I'd be lying if I said it was not awesome, but I'd also be lying if it wasn't equally as frustrating. Sukuna was so strong that the students could not keep up, and honestly, I don't think they really could ever surpass Sukuna's true brute strength as a sorcerer. However, they were able to beat Sukuna by nerfing his power and using his condition as a cursed object against him. Gege threw everything at Sukuna. Sukuna was stabbed, shot, humbled, jumped. He was ripped apart, hit by domains, black flashed, eviscerated by Jacob's ladder. He was hollow purpled, and finally he got destroyed by Yuji's soul dismantle. However, the pacing and the events that led to his defeat were greatly drawn out and very convenient, especially in Sukuna's final push. Nobara's return at the very end was hasty, and it made me view her character as a sort of Deus Ex Machina rather than as a person, so to end Sukuna with such convenience was very anticlimactic, and it felt like we actually still had more to go in the fight besides the fact that we just spent an entire year just reaching this point. This fight went on for a very long time, and it was expected that Sukuna would ultimately be defeated. However, this battle's conclusion was lacking more than what I would expect from Gege. Sukuna was effectively jumped by the JJK main trio. Nobara came out of nowhere with resonance, preventing Sukuna's malevolent shrine, and Yuji capitalized and ended the fight with a final black flash. And lastly, Megumi decided to live for others in the end and overcome Sukuna, which led to both of them separating from one another. To me personally, I would have liked to have seen more build up before we rushed to that kind of conclusion, because Megumi went from zero to hero. He turned a complete 180 in one chapter, and Kugisaki came out of left field in the most convenient way possible. It's honestly written in a way that's more expected rather than subverting expectation, which is usually how Gege writes things. However, the real problem is how the actual story ended. When it was announced that Gege would end the manga in 5 chapters, it was a mixed bag of opinions. Some people could accept it and maybe hope that Gege would make a part 2 or expand upon the series or something else, and many others just write this off as complete trash. And you know what? This ending was actually just bad. And it's not bad in the sense that this was the worst writing ever. No, it's bad because this was a whole lot of nothing. Jujutsu Kaisen's last chapters had almost no substance and no meaning whatsoever. And it's strange because an ending should make you feel a sense of satisfaction, or at least a sort of bittersweetness because a great series is gone. However, at least for me, it just made me feel empty. After Sukuna's defeat, there was a clear lack of purpose. Many characters like Yuta and Higuruma survived despite the odds. Characters like Megumi and Nobara survived without consequence, and right at the end really carry on like everything was just the same. All of these loose side stories are wrapped up quickly, and it felt like there was supposed to be more and more value in the conclusions of our cast, like a new beginning for the next generation. However, we actually need to see what's new. Is there a new problem, a new threat, some type of resolution? But we never really had any kind of solid payoff. Curses still exist. The cycle of curses is still a thing, and the reincarnated sorcerers are all unresolved with their place in the world, and even Tengen's condition is unclear, which is odd considering how important Tengen is to the Jujutsu world. Everything just kind of fell into place and just worked out. In chapter 269, there was some kind of talk about the new shadow style and its relation to the big 3 clans and the power struggle between the society, but it was completely pointless. With 2 chapters left and no hope for a part 2, it's honestly like a waste of time. And even in the very last mission, it was just frankly boring. Even with Yuji, Megumi, and Nobara back in action, their mission was extremely low stakes and had very little value. Gege even tried to sneak in a lesson with Gojo as an example for Yuji, because Gojo wanted his students and everyone to grow up, to grow stronger, and forget about him. For at least one of them to develop strength different from that of his own and surpass him. And you know, even Yuji thought that it was out of character for someone like Gojo to say something like that. However, Gojo's dream was always to raise strong and intelligent allies. Despite Gojo's strength and selfishness as a sorcerer, to raise those strong allies is Gojo's dream. However, it still is a bit strange for Yuji to take Gojo's example and use that confidence in his peers on a nobody like this random curse user, which had incredibly petty motives. However, it's still pretty good that Yuji will always remember Gojo and will carry on his will to never leave anyone behind. He definitely did not leave Megumi in the darkness, so I guess no one else will have to be alone again. Yet by far the best aspect of this ending and the last little bit of saving grace for this series was actually Sukuna's conclusion. And Sukuna's ending is a little deeper than one might think. Just this once, we see the humanity inside of this curse that is Ryoma and Sukuna. And I think Yuji might have awakened a kind of realization in Sukuna simply because he was beaten. Yuji was very symbolic in the way he displayed compassion and benevolence. Even in the very last manga cover, Yuji looks down on Sukuna because Yuji's quote-unquote truth has accepted Sukuna even when no one else would. Essentially, Yuji is like a bodhisattva of compassion, or like a Buddha of forgiveness. Yuji understands that now, you are me. Sukuna and Yuji are one and the same. However, Yuji accepts his humanity and was raised as a human. However, Sukuna was so cursed by his own circumstances, like his dying mother, his brother that he ate, and the ones that persecuted him, and so on, that Sukuna couldn't help but to just spew out the curses sprawling inside him, and he lived only for himself. And this is how a human proclaimed himself as a curse. Sukuna even doubled down and died as a curse, but what he ultimately decides is something that is kind of amazing. In the end, Sukuna has a final talk with Mahito, and to me, this conversation itself was like a final clash of truths. This was where there was a distinction of human versus curse. At the start, Mahito proved Sukuna was the way that he was as an act of revenge against those who persecuted and resented his existence. And Sukuna accepts that he lived the only way that he knew how, despite how it looked, which is why Sukuna is such a horrible monster that kills and eats people just like a curse. However, as a human, he actually took himself back. He saw that there were two different paths that he could have gone down. While it's not very clear who this woman, this shrine maiden is, it's likely Hirozu, but the point being is that Sukuna could have chosen to love and value something besides just himself, albeit some type of romantic love like someone like Hirozu, or unconditional love like for Uraume. And in the end, Sukuna said, should there be a next time, then he would walk a different path. So Sukuna recognizes that he could have loved others instead of just living only to please himself as a calamity. So what this proves to me is that there is humanity in this so-called curse. Sukuna was ultimately human and he was willing to change, versus Mahito, who now by all means is a true cursed spirit down to Mahito's very soul. Yet in the very end, Mahito was the one left behind sulking like a little kid. Yet there is just something so oddly beautiful about a monster like Sukuna deciding to change his ways, taking Uraume by the hand and just accepting himself, just walking into eternity. It's so sad, it's ethereal, and literally gives me goosebumps because of what could become of them. But I'm glad at least in the very end, Sukuna chose his truth and accepted his humanity. And you'd never expect that from someone like Sukuna, who is evil incarnate. However, even a cursed soul like Sukuna can care about someone and treasure it. This was the very last time Gege really touched that spark of fascination that I had with the series. It wasn't much, but at least he made something considerate and thoughtful to Sukuna's conclusion and decided to end JJK with a little bit of care. However, I wish we kept this kind of tone throughout the conclusion and actually had a considerable amount of time to explore backstories and differing plot points throughout the series instead of abruptly ending it. It is very sad to see that for a series that is very near and dear to my heart. However, I thank Gege Akutami very much for this wonderful story and also a chance to share it here on this platform with you amazing brothers and sisters. So from here on out, it's a new dream, a new story, and a new adventure. I thank each and every one of you for watching, and as a JJK content creator, there obviously needs to be a change. So look out for new anime and manga content coming to this channel, Jujutsu Kaisen and beyond. This series has been an amazing experience that I will never forget and always remember for as long as I live. And hopefully it's been the same for you, brothers and sisters. This has been Enemy Stand User, and I will see you guys in the next one.